Good morning, Director. I see we have online the auditor and the superintendent. In attendance here are the treasurer and secretary. Seems we have a quorum. So get online, but I don't have a link in my calendar. Is there an email that I can go to or something like that to get a link so I can, you know, if there's any chats, I can look at those? Okay, thanks. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the Business Council is on deck first this morning.
Right. So I see Josh, I see Julie, and others. So please proceed, Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone for joining today. We'll be talking about 6 projects. It'll seem like 5, but it's really 6. And Julie Kozlowski and her team is here to discuss those projects. At the Business Council, we're pretty excited about these projects because they represent what we think are some really good uses of the BRC monies and a way to ensure that a long-time viability of these communities is here. Just to kind of give you a quick overview, 2 of these projects represent something that we really like, which is leveraging the monies that the state has with other sources of money so that these projects can be really taken further and fully developed. And then a number of these projects are planning projects, which we also really like because it helps the community have a full direction and really be able to look to the future and find out how they're going to solve their challenges. And so these planning grants are pretty interesting. A couple of them are interesting because in some cases our board actually, suggested that more money be available to a couple of these because rather than doing maybe small patchwork quilt types of plans for a certain just as a certain property or a certain project, we felt like it would be better for the community to do so. And so a good representation of projects, again, looking on the front side and planning, and then looking to make sure that the monies are leveraged as much as they can and activating more money. So we're really pleased to describe these today, and I'm sure that there will be some public support for those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Kozlowski.
And Mr. Director, just I believe we have a set of minutes to cover before we get to that.
Yeah, and I'll have yes, thank you for reminding me there. Yeah, and I'll have Julie walk through those if we could. Thanks.
Good morning, Governor, members of the board. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the April Slib meeting. Do you have any edits to those?
Thank you, Julie. For the members of the board, any edits? Mr. Secretary, I see you reaching forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to prove that I do read the minutes, I have 2 N's in my name. So later in the body, the beginning's correct, but later on, it's not spelled correctly. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Superintendent.
do we have 2 sets of minutes to approve, one from the January meeting and one from the April?
The host muted me. We do, and I was going to take them in sequence. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Unless we believe that we can cover them both with one motion. I'm all for efficiency if that's the right order of business.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the April meeting minutes. That is what we originally discussed, and then we can take the January minutes separate.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved by the superintendent with the corrections, I believe, as indicated by the secretary. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
It is. Is there a second? It is seconded by the secretary. All in favor, signify by saying aye or a thumbs up if you're on TV.
Aye.
That passes. Thank you. Next order is the January 16th, 2020 minutes. Is there any discussion on those? Any discussion? Hearing none. What's the favor of the board? I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes. It's been moved by the treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by the superintendent. All in favor, either a thumbs up if you're on TV or an aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank
Mr.
you. All right. Who was on? Who
Mr.
spoke up?
Chairman, I don't know
Oh,
that
yeah.
it's critical, but we actually approved those January minutes in April. But better twice than never, so.
Did we? I thought, I didn't see that. Okay, well. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought those were taken out of order. Thank you, Madam Auditor, for bringing us correct. So with that, Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Governor. The Business Ready Community funds available at this time are $19,645,659. Applications were taken March 1st. That was the deadline for the cycle you're considering today. We actually received 6 applications, but one of them was withdrawn. And so before you today are 5 applications from Saratoga Carbon County Impact Joint Powers Board, Washakie County, a joint venture between the city of Evanston and Uena County, the town of Moorcroft, the town of Pine Bluffs. Their requests total $1,587,500. And the Wyoming Business Council Board of Directors is recommending to you $1,637,500. A bit more than was requested, which we'll cover, and Josh had alluded to. So if all of these projects are funded as recommended, there'll still be a balance of $18,008,159. Because this is an account that is continuously appropriated, these funds will roll into the next biennium's budget for the Business Ready Community account. All of these projects they don't have anything hanging over them in terms of we're not waiting on an AG opinion for any reason. So they are for your consideration with one exception, and that is a loan that is not yet approved. We don't have final confirmation on a loan for Saratoga's project, and Noel will walk you through that. So if we were concerned with the allocation plan this quarter, there would be just over $9.8 million available funding for this cycle. So there's ample funding for these projects. And with that, I will ask Noel to begin with the Saratoga Carbon County project.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Noel Reed here, Community Development Manager with the Wyoming Business Council. The first project is brought to you by the Saratoga Carbon County Impact Joint Powers Board. They are requesting $1 million in community readiness funds for the extension of water and sewer infrastructure to a site located on the west end of town. This project will expand the water and sewer infrastructure to a site that has been targeted for commercial growth, as outlined in the town of Saratoga's 2016 Comprehensive Master Plan, as well as provide necessary water and sewer infrastructure to assist in the construction of a new 42,000 square foot healthcare facility to be located within the proposed site. In addition to that medical facility, this project will assist in retaining 25 to 36 employees at the Saratoga Medical Clinic/Pharmacy, as well as the nursing facility, which will become part of the new medical facility, provide medical services in town that would otherwise require residents to travel to other communities, assist in the future development of hotel motels, service-related development, and new business expansion related to the healthcare facility, as well as allow for existing businesses to benefit from the water and sewer infrastructure. The request of $1 million in grant funds will be matched with a $200,000 cash match from the Gretchen Swanson Family Foundation. Additional funding sources for the construction of the hospital are from the following sources: $17,657,000 in a USDA loan funding. That we are still waiting to hear if they have received approval on that, and our board's recommendation is contingent upon that USDA loan being approved. A $500,000 from a Helmsley grant for medical equipment, which is also contingent on the USDA funding, and they have almost received $4 million from private funding sources. The Business Council Board approved our staff's recommendation up to $1 million in funding for this project. The reason that they worded it of up to $1 million is the site had actually changed location from the time that we received the application to the Business Council Board meeting. And this will result in potentially some cost savings for the project. So we're just waiting for final numbers from the community on what that will look like. And so we worded it that way to ensure that the community had enough money to complete the project, but we will put the final figure into the grant agreement with the Joint Powers Board once we receive those final numbers. I'm happy to answer any questions with that, and I believe that there are members from the community online as well that will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Noel. Let me ask in order, I guess, Mr. Secretary, any questions?
No, Mr. Chairman, no questions. I just wanted to point out and thank the Gretchen Swanson Foundation for their participation. I say that because I served with Representative Buchholz many years ago, and sadly he had passed away while he was serving in the legislature. And I just wanted to say thank you to a wonderful family for all their community involvement. And we miss Kurt a lot, and just wanted to say that because that's an important piece of this.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I absolutely concur. Madam Auditor, any questions?
Kind of, more of a comment, and thanks to the staff for their work on this. And I know this isn't a business committed grant, but in a way it's almost as close as it could be without being one. Is that somewhat accurate? I mean, given that the approval is contingent on the successful approval of the USDA funding portion. I guess my point / question is, although it's not a business committed grant, it's there's a very strong likelihood of that outcome.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Julie or Noel, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, this is Julie, Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor. Yes, that's correct. The community saw, I guess, a lot of value in the readiness aspect that this infrastructure will provide for other lots in that area, for other businesses. And so rather than hanging their hat on this one entity, they saw it as a readiness grant, didn't need a lot of funding to make it happen. So that's the avenue they chose to go with this. But you're absolutely correct in that it has all the flavor of a business committed with job creation and one particular entity that's on the hook, if you will, for the success of the piece of the medical clinic. But because the community was really interested in that readiness component, that's why they chose to go that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Madam Auditor? Take that as a no. Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I think this is a good model for other communities like Sundance that's looking for some medical facilities. There's a lot of partnerships that were brought together, addresses a lot of different community needs. And I think that if this moves through, could show, I guess, the road to success in some other communities.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I also agree. Madam Superintendent. Madam, I think you are on mute. You like it, I take.
I do. Just ditto to my colleagues' comments.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Ben, are there people wishing to address the board from Saratoga? Okay. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, we hear you.
Great, thank you. My name is Will Faust. I am the chairman of the Platte Valley Healthcare Project, the locally formed nonprofit that is developing the medical center, and here with Craig Kopaz, who is representing the Joint Powers Board. First, we want to just thank you all for considering our project. We've been working very hard on this for the past 2 years. And would really, I think you guys have done a great job of explaining the project. We're very excited about it. A couple updates. Our private donations now committed are at just shy of $4.6 million. Our USDA loan application is in Washington, D.C. right now. That was sent up about a week ago, and we're expecting to hear from that by the end of June. Some good news there is interest rates are set to fall again in July, which only improves the long-term feasibility of the financial numbers that we've looked at. Really, the biggest thing is, this has been a very collaborative effort with county representatives, joint powers boards, all the local municipal governing bodies here in the Valley, and something that sees broad support. And we're really excited that you all are here to listen to us.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions as well? Hearing none, is there anyone else that would like to address the board? Okay, well, thank you for those comments. I guess I would entertain a motion if someone was so inclined.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
I would move that we approve the request from the Saratoga Carbon County Impact Joint Powers Board for water and sewer extension in the amount of $1 million, and obviously incorporating the same contingencies deliberated by the Business Council Board, namely the approval of the USDA loan. And if I need to tweak that motion a touch, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? It's been seconded by the treasurer. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? All in favor signify by an aye or a thumbs up if you're on TV.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. I have 2 thumbs up and 2 ayes, and I guess an aye as well. Thank you. So unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Julie or Noel is the next. What is the next matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next project is from Washakie County. Washakie County is requesting $500,000 in community enhancement funding for renovations of the former Ace Hardware building to be used for the Washakie County Library, Worland 10 Sleep Chamber of Commerce, and the Washakie Development Association, the local economic development organization. Space will be created in the new library for business incubation and entrepreneurial use and for workforce training. This will include, but not be limited to, conducting at least 4 workforce training classes per year, creating 3 co-working spaces for support of startup businesses and entrepreneurs, and hosting entrepreneurial networking and mentoring events. The community has spent many years exploring the need for an expanded and modernized library space. In 2007, county and other community leaders began studying options for either renovating the existing building or relocating the library and renovating another building. They determined that to truly address the community's needs, a larger and more efficient space would be needed. The Worland 10 Sleep Chamber of Commerce is also in need of a new home. In 2015, the chamber had to vacate its previous location on North 10th due to black mold, and that building has since been torn down. Since that time, the chamber has been housed in temporary locations that are neither very visible or convenient for visitors, the business community, or anybody else who needs to access their services. In addition to all this, this project has enabled a domino effect of economic development projects throughout the downtown area. When Shopko went out of business in town, an empty building was left that was located on the edge of the downtown area. This gave the local Ace Hardware store the ability to expand their operations and relocate to the old Shopko building. However, the owner of the Ace Hardware was concerned about leaving another empty building in the downtown area. The community took advantage of these opportunities by moving forward with their library project by by proposing renovations to the Ace Hardware building to be used for the Washakie County Library and other economic community development services. And since that time, the Ace Hardware has moved into the old Shopko building and has expanded their services and has hired a few full-time employees with plans to hire a few more as well. The local match for this project is 82% of total project costs. The community has raised over $1 million in private donations, and the remaining cash and in-kind matches are being funded by the WDA and Washakie County. The board is in support of this project and recommends funding as requested. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I believe there are community members as well online.
Thanks very much, Noel. Let me take members of the board in reverse order now. Madam Superintendent, any questions?
No questions from me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer? No questions. Madam Auditor?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary? No questions. Ben, are there members from the community that would like to address the board? No hands raised. Well, very good. So,
unmute, there we go. Okay. Governor?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you identify yourself? And we can't see you, so we can see Washakie County.
Yeah, so this is Washakie County. We're all the commissioners here. We're actually just before our commission meeting this morning, and Representative Greer is with us, and our library director is with us, as well as our grant writer, and our paper is here as well. We just wanted to take this moment to say thank you, and we appreciate your consideration from your honorable elects. And this is a project that has been in the works for a long time, and we've done our due diligence with the taxpayers' money. And this project is just beginning. It's going to short term, it's going to help out with at least 30 contract employees, and then there's going to be some long-term employees as well that is going to benefit from this. But again, I'd like to say thank you for your consideration. And is there anybody else here that wants to speak? Mr. Greer?
You want me to speak?
Yes. Yes.
So, Governor, can you hear me all right? We're social distancing here in Washakie County. So, great.
We can hear you.
Okay, no, great project. And as you know, as y'all know on this board is, we have an issue in what I call our 3A towns with Main Street. And it's hard to keep Main Street healthy in Worland and Torrington and Powell and Newcastle all around the country. And our commissioners and our economic development group have all worked hard to try to address what's been happening on Main Street in Wyoming. And this has been a great opportunity. Lee Kennedy really did expand his business, took advantage, and he's just about done remodeling. Just did a wonderful job expanding Dave's Hardware into the old Shopco building. And as a result, there's a gorgeous building right on the corner, right in the middle of downtown Worland, with great parking, located close to City Hall. And this is just going to afford a wonderful opportunity to give us a modern library. And I know our library director's here and been patiently waiting. We've been gathering these funds with our 1-cent sales tax for a long time, trying to find the right way to do this. And this is going to be just an unbelievable way to leverage these funds with a private donation, which is not insignificant, maybe $1 million, to go ahead and just make us a monumental leap forward to enhance our community here in Worland. And so I'm here as a guy running a business saying, I need this to help recruit to our community. It is truly an enhancement, and I'll be quiet and ask for your support and appreciate it. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Representative, and there's no pressure here on this board with you overlooking how our deliberations go. Just kidding, just kidding. I have to say, I think it's an incredibly worthy project, and it's absolutely critical for Main Street there. And so let me ask if anybody has any questions. I'm just looking up on the screen. I see that Auditor Racines has a question.
Mr. Chairman, and if, you know, whether Representative Greer or the commissioners, I'm highly supportive of this project, and I can't eloquently express how important I know that libraries are to our communities, but I also know that they are one of the first things being trimmed and services altered as we face both at the state and local level substantial budget challenges. So I would love just maybe a little flavor of what's going on in Washakie County, and just I'd hate to have the county not be able to run the library after it's put into place. Again, not in any way. I know how critical our libraries are, but I just also know that they're one of the first realms taking a hit. There's a question in there somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is Aaron Anderson, Washakie County Commissioner, and I think as we look at libraries and the services that we're putting into this, we're really trying to broaden, you know, this is a vision we've had in the commission a long time to broaden the role of the library in the community, and we're pulling not only in our chamber and economic development, but also our youth alternatives will be involved in this. So we're kind of consolidating a lot of things under one roof, which I think gives us some efficiencies and economics of scale that should help support it in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Further questions? Hearing and seeing none, what is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, it would be an honor to move this project, and if I can pull up the amounts, hang on just a minute. I had them up a second ago. All right. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. They were here. Okay, Mr. Chairman, Would move the staff's recommendation for the Washakie County request. And I do not have additional information on, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I think if someone has the information at hand, they should go ahead and move it, and I would love to second it.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Noel to just clarify, so.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. They're requesting $500,000 in grant amounts.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to take a second stab at it. Mr.
Very
Chairman,
good.
I'll move to approve the Washakie County Library and Economic Development Project, Community Enhancement Project in the amount of $500,000.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by the secretary. All in favor, either signify by a thumbs up if you're on TV, and otherwise an aye. Aye. And I believe that is unanimous. Thank you. Thanks very much. Good luck, Washakie County. Stay strong. Thanks. Next matter, Noel or Julie.
Governor, the next 3 projects, the planning grants will be presented by John Wendling.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome.
Good morning,
John.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is John Wendling, Grants Project Manager with the Wyoming Business Council. First planning project comes from the city of Evanston and Uintah County. It's a joint project. They're requesting $25,000 each in planning funds to conduct a detailed architectural engineering assessment and redevelopment plan for a portion of the existing historic Wyoming State Hospital for various economic, educational, community, and other developmental opportunities. The state hospital campus is currently owned and used by the Wyoming Department of Health. Most of these buildings will be vacated in 2021 once the new state hospital facility is completed. The Wyoming Department of Health does not have the funds to do any future studies or renovations to the campus and are poised to turn the property over to Evanston in the future. The state hospital campus is approximately 100 acres, consisting of 35 structures. The plan will specifically evaluate 6 to 10 structures on the eastern end of the state hospital campus, which are most visible from the city of Evanston and Interstate 80, and possess the most potential for economic development reutilization. They are also the most aesthetic, dynamic, and historically iconic buildings on the campus. The completed plan will provide valuable concrete data about the viability of the designated structures and how they can be preserved, raised, or renovated for other businesses, educational, or vocational opportunities. A state hospital task force was spearheaded by the city of Evanston and created in 2019. This task force has examined several needs to the community based on public input and from recent regional study that demonstrated the need for the following: expansion of higher education. Evanston also has a growing retirement demographic and need for assisted living. Also business recruitment and expansion. Evanston has a unique industry sector in manufacturing, clean energy, and healthcare, to name a few. Evanston also lacks available space of decent size for business development and recruitment of similar industry types that would locate in the area. The state hospital campus could be developed to attract these businesses. The funding sources as follows. The BRC amount is $25,000 as stated for each, Uintah County and Evanston. They also have a cash match EDA grant pending of $50,000 a piece, as well as their own grant match of $25,000 for a total of $100,000 each to cover planning costs. The board recommendation, they approved and were no concerns. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Don. Any questions, Mr. Secretary?
You know, I would just comment that I think this is money well spent. You know, we've talked about demolition costs in the budget, you know, for that campus and other areas of the state where we're building new buildings, and I think it's a great opportunity for Uena County to maybe repurpose those buildings and structures. And we've talked about that before, so I think this is a great idea, so.
Thank you. Let me ask Madam Auditor, any questions?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer? No questions? Superintendent?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Well, let me also say that I think this is a tremendous asset, and I'm glad to see it being studied. There has been a lot of conversation about the cost of tearing some of these very substantial structures down and where to best purpose them. So I agree absolutely with the Secretary. And I would, I guess, are there any members from the community that Evanston or Uena County that would like to address the board?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, can you hear me?
Thank you. Rocco, I think this is you.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Great. Please feel free to go ahead.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to address this. And we understand how irregular this request is, and it is a unique situation, but we see an incredible opportunity here in Evanston. And we want to partner with state and federal entities and come up with a plan for this. So thank you for your time, and I don't really have anything else to add.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership. You've certainly demonstrated a real ability in southwestern Wyoming to do the most with what you have, and I compliment you on this and other recent efforts. And I guess we're all thinking of you with the challenges with COVID that have shown up over the last few days. Is there anyone else? There's no one else, so if there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we adopt the Wyoming Business Council's recommendation for BRC planning project feasibility study funds in the amount of $25,000 each for Evanston and Uena County.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by the treasurer. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify with a thumbs up or an aye.
Aye.
That motion is unanimous. Thank you. Next matter, John?
Yes, sir. The next planning grant comes from the town of Moorcroft. It's a feasibility study for the improvement and growth of the Moorcroft Town Center. The study will define potential growth opportunities, stimulate additional employment, prioritize cost-effective renovation projects, and identify other possible building uses. The Moorcroft Town Center that previously served as an elementary school is approximately 58,000 square feet and was constructed in the late 1920s and has had several additions and renovations done over time. The building did not meet the Crook County School District standards for the use of school and was deeded to the town in 2010-2011. The facility is currently in use, but not to its fullest capacity. The town maintains the facility, but does not receive enough funds through lease and rents to maintain the building long-term. Finding the needs for the community and utilizing this facility to fit these needs is important for the town and the future of this facility. Otherwise, it cannot be operated and maintained. It could be demolished if future use and funding is not found. The building has space to rent for the day and or weekend and does have some long-term tenants to leasing space in it as well. These leases include teen room space for at-risk junior high and high school students, Western County Region 3 Children's Development Center and Preschool, a physical therapist office, election polling office, Moorcroft High School athletic and youth programs, rent the gym for practices and games. Moorcroft Senior Center also uses a kitchen for meal prep, local Food pantry will utilize the kitchen about 3 times a month for food. The existing stage area has been converted to a small gym with local memberships and used by outlying communities and visitors. The proposed feasibility study will help identify the potential of the building aspects of the WBC strategic plan, that this plan would correspond with, include those that target business needs, community needs, and educational training uses, such as create an entrepreneurial space for startups, set aside dedicated space for businesses to lease, create an emergency shelter for the community and outlying areas, utilize the existing library in the building for the county library, and space for a child care center. It should be noted that we as a staff asked the board to increase the grant amount to instead of $18,750 to $43,750. Currently, our planning grants, the economic plan, comprehensive plan, those are only cash matches, and that can be kind of, and it tends for the smaller communities that they would rather go for cash issues. It's easier for them to match on a feasibility study, which is $25,000. So we recommended that this community who does not have a comprehensive economic development plan, that they would do an entire economic development plan to get a bigger picture. And we asked the board to waive the rules, to approve, to increase funding to $43,750, but keep the match at $6,250, which is 12.5% instead of 25%. And the board motioned to approve this. Are there any questions?
Thanks, John. Let me ask, are there any questions, either superintendent or auditor? I don't see any. Mr. Treasurer? Mr. Treasurer?
Not so much a question, but I think the circumstances here underlie the necessity for some of these communities to start looking at that 0.25% economic development sales tax, so they have the opportunities to make some of the matches and to actually be a little bit more proactive and start pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, so to speak. And in light of the budget concerns that we have going forward, and possibly not being able to support different areas of local communities in fashion that we have in the past, that try to make people aware that this is an option and it's not that painful. It's something that Ed brought forward when he was in the legislature, and I supported on the Senate side. Goshen County is the only county that's actually availed themselves of it, and it's been a godsend to our economic development operations in that county. So it's something that I think that its time needs to be teed up again, and would really help these communities out in a lot of different ways.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Good points. Ben, is there anyone from Crook County or the town of Moorcroft that wants to speak to this project? Okay, thank you. One question I would have, since I remember looking at an old school, elementary school in Johnson County that was built in 1909, and as we looked at it, one of the big issues there was asbestos abatement. John, would that be part of this study as well?
They have completed a structural assessment study in 2014, and they did have some of those findings. Julie, do you have any more on those kind of things?
Governor, members of the board, no, I don't recall what all has been done, but I know that they have mitigated some of those concerns based on that 2014 study. I also want to share with you that Moorcroft was having trouble logging into the meeting, but the Mayor Claire would just like you to know that this is very important to the community and would thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Will you convey, please convey to the mayor, thanks for trying to log in. I just was through that lovely town on Sunday on the way up to the Hewlett Rodeo and went by the project. So
Great.
thanks. If there is no further discussion, I would entertain a motion. It's been moved by the treasurer to pass the staff's recommendation of a planning project with the provisos that are in with the waived rules, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a second? It's been seconded by the secretary. All in favor, either a thumbs up or an aye?
Aye.
That motion carries as well. Thank you. Congratulations, Moorcroft. And then, John, I think we have one more.
Yes, sir. The last one comes from the town of Pine Bluffs. They're requesting $18,750 in planning funds to conduct a feasibility study of an assisted living facility on 3 properties identified by the town. The proposed study will conduct comprehensive research and review data to include the community's economic indicators, competitive senior assisted living availability, and facility demand generators. The study will also conduct the research as a macro and micro market analysis of Pine Bluffs and the surrounding areas to determine the viability to support developmental potential. Pine Bluffs population as of 2017 was approximately 1,177. The median age was 40 and a half, and the percentage of age demographics were more than 50% of the population's ages 18 to 64, and less than 20% of the population's ages 65 or over. Not considered in the population were the outlying areas of Burns, Albin, and Carpenter. The town of Pine Bluffs completed the North Wales land use study in November of 2018. This study identified potential land uses of a parcel of agricultural land the town purchased to determine future uses. The town has already begun working on recommendations from the study and completion of a northwest water loop to serve this property. Planning stages for sewer infrastructure and working with YDOT and UPRR for the relocation of the current railroad crossing into the site. A large portion of the property has been identified for residential use, multifamily dwellings, and potential senior housing, along with other commercial and industrial potential. Pine Bluffs is another, they, however, don't have a community development plan, or that is outdated, excuse me. And while the town has been working on updates, there's no current plan that identifies assisted living as a top priority for the community. So this was another project we had recommended or asked the board to waive the grant amount and increase it, the request to $43,750 and keep the match at $12,000 or at $6,250 to give the community a more comprehensive economic plan and see what other priorities there might be in the community as well, and see how where assisted living actually falls and all that. The board approved or unanimously approved to waive the rules for this planning grant as well. Any questions?
Thank you, John. I don't have any questions, but let me ask if any of the other fellow board members do. I will note that the mayor and town clerk are trying to get logged in. I don't know if they've had success yet, but just let them know that we're monitoring. So, any questions? Any questions? Is there? Have we had any luck, Ben, with? Great, thank you. And that's exactly the question I wanted to ask was to Chris. But Chris, please feel free to address the board.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, board. I know the town of Pine Bluffs considers this to be a very, very important proposed development. And I think Kim Patterson might be on the phone to talk more about it, but as a town engineer, I can say that, you know, we always appreciated the funding and the assistance from the state for the North Wells property. And I think this will be a great initial development for that property. And thank you very much on behalf of the town.
Thank you. And Chris, a question for you. I know Pine Bluffs has struggled a little bit with the water system over the last few years, and I just wanted to get your assessment of where that stands now.
You know, we do have a MRG application in front of you. The town, you know, from a water supply standpoint, the town has been in good shape. It's been the water quality issues that we've had the deepest problem, the greatest problem with. And we did have an EPA notice of non-compliance in October this year, based on having high nitrate levels in town water supply. And our overall proposal that's in front of you today will be related to the construction of a deep well into the Lance Fox Hills Formation. And that truly is our best way and probably most economic way of actually treating our water. We actually have 2 other Lance wells, but we don't have a redundant water supply. And, you know, our alternatives are limited to treatment, which is very expensive. And then you develop a waste product and blending. And so the Lance well that's in front of you today is our concept towards blending our water to meet our long-term water quality needs. So.
Okay, thank you. And I do note that Clerk Kimberly Patterson is on. Is she wishing to address the board, or is Mayor Clark wanting to address the board? All right, sorry, Curtis.
Good morning, Governor Gordon and members of the board. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the Wyoming Business Council for going above and beyond our original request. This is going to be a fantastic opportunity for the town of Pine Bluffs. Not only will it help us move forward with, you know, looking into our senior assisted living facility to keep our families together as they enter their senior years, but it would create more jobs. By increasing the level of the project, we are going to, we are really going to be able to look at our economic development potential, especially in our Main Street area and in our commercial district by Wyoming Malting. As you've probably heard, we have a new hotel that broke ground a couple of weeks ago. And so we feel that we are moving forward with creating more and more jobs here in Pine Bluffs and increasing the viability of our community. So again, thank you all so much for your consideration. This is a fantastic opportunity.
Thank you very much for those comments. Does anyone else want to address the board? I see the superintendent would like to ask a question. Nope, she doesn't. She's just, thank you. Madam Auditor, any questions? Treasurer, Secretary? Okay, well, thank you. Thanks again for those comments. I would entertain a motion. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we adopt the Wyoming Business Council recommendation of a $43,750 grant for a robust economic and community development master plan for the town of Pine Bluffs.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been, I heard the treasurer first, sorry, auditor. Moved by the secretary, seconded by the treasurer. All in favor, signify by an aye or a thumbs up.
Aye.
Motion carries, unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Noel. Thanks, John. Director Durrell, is there any further comment that you have?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the board. We really appreciate the consideration today. And as we mentioned at the beginning, these projects really can make a difference across the state, and I think they match up with a lot of what we want to accomplish at the Business Council. And so, we thank you for your consideration, but we also thank the communities that put these together and all the hard work to make them happen, because it wasn't just work with the Business Council. As you can see, it's work throughout their communities, it's work with other funding partners, and we really see it as a great direction for these communities. And so we thank everyone for taking the time and effort today, but more importantly, the months that led up to this. So and we look forward to the impacts that it's going to have in the future. And so thank you again.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks to your entire crew. You've done a lot of remarkable work over the last few days. And noting that I just got some correspondence from Saratoga, I'm going to recommend that they chat with you fairly quickly. So thanks very much. Is there any further business for the Business Council to come before the board? Hearing none, I thank you again. And I guess we will close that portion of the meeting and Director move on to your portion. Thanks again.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to letter B on the agenda today, which are reports. We provided the board with the usual MRG, Mineral Royalty Grant reports behind tab B. We would stand for questions at this point. We don't have anything to add to that report.
Are there any questions of the staff on the matters behind tab B? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, we provided the materials for this meeting to the board in advance and have briefed each board member individually prior to the meeting. At this point, I'm prepared to propose a consent list, but before I do so, I wanted to provide a little context for the meeting. This is the final MRG meeting of the biennium. The remaining balance for allocation today is $6,657,323. We received applications for many worthwhile projects. We do not question the merits of any of the applications we received. OSLI staff collaborated with its sister agencies, DEQ, Water Development Office, DOT, the Fire Marshal's Office, and others, and they worked to prioritize the applications. After that, the Grant Review Committee was convened to evaluate the projects. They considered a number of factors, including the historic funding levels, the outstanding grant amounts, other sources of funding for the projects, and other factors. And I'll note that last week, toward the end of the week, we actually received some money back that reverted. Some projects came in under budget, so we had a little bit of additional money for some of the recommended partial funding matters. Today, we are recommending full funding for 13 projects totaling $4,903,176, partial funding for 3 projects in the amount of $1,754,147, and no funding for 1 project. Again, as I mentioned, this is the end of the biennium. Any MRG funds that are not awarded by the board today revert to the cash balance of the fund, the local government capital construction account. So those will not be carried over for distribution through the MRG program. With that, Mr. Chairman, we would propose the consent list include C2 and H1A, 1 through 13, which are the recommended full funding projects. And just for the record, I'll read those in. Fremont County Critical Detention Facility Security Upgrade, $700,000. Fremont County Fire Protection District, Battalion 6 Crowheart Fire Station, $750,000. Guernsey Rural Fire Protection District, Rural Portable Engine Building, $14,000. Hawk Springs Fire Protection District 5C, Type 3X Wildland Grass Engine, $120,000. High Meadow Ranch Water District, Water Upgrades Phase 2, $600,000. Town of Lingle ambulance, $119,150. Town of Pine Bluffs central low nitrate deep well for $260,440. Platte County Fire Command Unit, $51,221. Powell Hospital District Sprinter purchase, $47,775. Town of Saratoga Volunteer Fire Department turnout gear, priority 1 of 2, $35,120. Torrington Fire Protection District aerial truck, $1,050,000. Town of Upton Willow Street water and sewer replacement, $972,095. There is a mistake on the proposed consent list on that dollar figure, but it is $972,095. And finally, the City of Worland line portion of outfall sewer and replacing the WWTP pumps in the amount of $183,375. So with that, Mr. Chairman, again, we would propose C2 and H1A 1 through 13 on the consent list, realizing that this is the final MRG meeting of the biennium. The board may wish to take the full funding recommendations individually. We'll leave it to your discretion. Thank you.
And thank you, Madam Director. And just for those viewing or watching or hoping to speak to these projects, as I have said a couple of times before, these are all recommended for full funding. We do want to hear from you, but want you to recognize that the train is leaving the station and you're on it. And we don't want you to have the opportunity to jump off unless you really want to. So with that, I would propose this approach. If the consent list is moved and successful, I would propose that we let anyone who wants to address the board, and then we'll move the consent list for passage, if that makes sense. So in other words, we'll put the consent list on the table, and then we'll allow anyone who wants to speak to those projects, and then we'll consider the motion for approval of the consent list and the director's recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. With that,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Treasurer.
I would move that we place the consent list on the table for consideration.
Okay, Mr. Treasurer has moved items C2 and H1, 1 through 13, for the attendant recommendations. Is there a second? Is there a second? It's been seconded by the secretary. Any discussion on the consent list? Any discussion? All in favor of the consent list is moved by the treasurer and seconded by the secretary. C2, H1 through H1, 1 through 13, signify by saying aye or thumbs up.
Aye.
That consent list is on the table, and so that motion carries. With that, Ben, is there anyone who would like to talk to any of these particular projects? I thank them all for tuning in. I particularly want to thank the town of Upton, as I understand, for turning back a pretty substantial sum of money. Okay, there are no hands raised. Well, thank you for bringing great projects to us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Treasurer.
I would move for the approval of the items in C1 through H1 for full funding, items 1 through 13, as was enumerated by the director. Do you want me to list those out again? Or
No, that's fine. I think that.
Okay. And so I would move for their approval by the State Loan Investment Board.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by the auditor, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
It is. So it's moved by the treasurer, seconded by the auditor. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye or a thumbs up. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Congratulations to all of those on the consent list. Thanks. Madam Director, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to H1B. Consider 3 applications recommended for partial funding. The first being the City of Douglas for the Douglas Fire Training Facility. The amount requested was $1,200,000. The amount recommended is $1 million. And again, I think they were the beneficiary of some of the money returning to the fund.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the staff? Any questions for the staff? Ben, is there anyone who would like to address the board?
Trevor from the Douglas Fire Department.
Thank you. Trevor. If you're talking, we cannot hear you.
Mr. Governor.
Yes, now we can.
How you doing, ladies and gentlemen of the
Doing
board?
well.
I appreciate the time.
Thanks.
Yeah, we requested 1.2 million, and the recommended was 1 million. Obviously, we really appreciate your consideration with this project. We've been working on it for trying to get the funding for it for close to 10 years now. Gathering information from different fire training facilities, things like that. These last couple of years, we really hit it hard with our committee. We have I guess one of the deals is there was some questions possibly that maybe we don't have the funding for props possibly, but I just wanted to mention that we were able to obtain a grant from Devon Energy for $25,000, another grant from Enbridge Energy for $5,000. We've been working closely with Mark Molman, Steve Schmidt, and Mike Gensler at Chesapeake Energy. They have a yard here in the Douglas area that they have a lot of surplus equipment. And they're working with us so we can obtain that equipment to use as fire training props. So we got a pretty good start on it. I guess I don't know what other information I can give, but I just appreciate your consideration there.
Thank you, Trevor. Are there any questions for Trevor? Please, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman and Trevor, thank you for being here, and thank you for your continued work on this project. If I remember correctly, some of my discomfort when this project came before the board the first time, and I think this was maybe expressed by more than just myself, was I wasn't fully confident that everything, that all boxes had been checked in order to coordinate with surrounding communities to make sure that we weren't duplicating resources. I think in particular, we had a pretty robust discussion about what was available in Riverton and whether you all were accessing that. And I think maybe Cody, sorry, I'm a bit fuzzy on that. So maybe you could just update us on what efforts Douglas has done to reach out to those other facilities and again, just make sure we're not duplicating facilities or resources.
Yep. So we do have access to, we go to 3 different fire schools every year. One in Riverton, one in Cody, and one in Wheatland. We have talked to all 3 of those agencies. And there's a lot of classes that all of those have, but there's a lot of classes that they don't have as well. And we don't want to take away anything from them. We want to be able to complement them. We want to be able to host and house trainings that aren't available in our area. And a lot of it is industrial related because we have a huge industrial footprint here in Converse County. with the oil and gas. I understand the downturn right now, but it's a big deal, and that poses a lot of different problems for us, especially when it's about $5,000 just for the class to send somebody down to TEEX, the Texas Engineering Extension, that hosts those classes for industrial firefighters. And if we can offer that here, that would save us a lot of money. That would save a lot of the other companies and agencies that have industrial fire brigades to be able to come to Douglas, which is, central to Wyoming and the region. And I think that would benefit a lot. Another thing is we don't want to be sending, we got a 50-man roster on our fire department, and it's really tough for us to send, more than just a few out to those. We restrict them to 8 firefighters per school, because we don't want to leave our community without those unmanned, if we have calls, incidents, things like that. So we do, like I said, we had 50 members, but that it is a volunteer department, and we want to make sure that we're able to support our community and not leave our community hanging when we're out of training. And we have, I'm sorry, we have talked to a lot of other firefighters as well, and fire departments. We got a letter of support from the Wheeland Fire Department that does host a fire school and has a fire training facility. And like I said, we really tried to figure out, okay, well, what can you offer and what would you like to see? And that's what we're really trying to incorporate in our facility. So I think that's it. Yep, you bet.
Thanks, Trevor. Any follow-up? None? Any further questions? Any further questions? Trevor, one question I wanted to understand was the water rescue portion. How is that coming together?
The water rescue portion, sir? Which part?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking
training availability.
Yeah.
So we have access. We have 2 individuals, myself and our training captain, that are swiftwater rescue technicians. And we do help our search and rescue and our firefighters with those trainings. And we kind of go to different places that have fishing accesses and things like that. But some place that we can have a dedicated facility for it, or that's safe access along the river, that we can have throw lines, staged at certain areas to protect us and things like that would be very beneficial. We also have access to an ice rescue instructor that has made his time available to us whenever we'd like him.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any further questions? What's the pleasure of the board? Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we adopt the Office of State Enforcement's recommendation for funding for the Douglas Fire Training Facility in the amount of $1 million.
It's been moved by the Secretary. Is there a second? It's been seconded by the Treasurer. Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by a thumbs up or an aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. Next matter.
Mr. Chairman, the next matter is B2, which is the Town of Saratoga Police Vehicle Replacements Priority 2 of 2. The amount requested was $62,006. The amount recommended for funding is $31,000. Generally, we don't fund a second priority for a community. I will yield the floor to Beth Blackwell to provide a little color on this decision for the board.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Oh, Ben got me. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as the director stated, we generally don't fund second priorities. However, when we received funding back, we looked at all of the applications, and at that time we only had 2 on the no funding list, Moorcroft and this application. The priority 1 application for Saratoga is approximately $35,000. we felt it was appropriate and reasonable to fund part of their second priority, given the small request of their first priority. If we partially funded their second priority, we're only giving them approximately $66,000 between the two, which is much smaller than many of the other grants for individuals who are getting one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any questions for the staff? Hearing none. Ben, is there anyone from the town of Saratoga? No hands are raised. Okay, thank you, Ben. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Madam Auditor.
I would move to approve the director's recommendation of $31,000 for police vehicle replacements to the town of Saratoga.
Thanks very much. It's been moved by the auditor for the town of Saratoga. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. It's been moved by the auditor, seconded by the superintendent. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye or a thumbs up. Aye. That motion carries. Next matter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to H1B3, the Town of Star Valley Ranch Water Improvement Project 2021. The amount of the request was $1,615,614. The amount recommended is $723,147. And with that, I'll yield the floor to Beth Blackwell again to provide some color on the matter for the board.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Town of Star Valley was kind of the catch-all. There's no rhyme or reason to the number that they received, the dollar amount. They were just a good project. They were ranked last in the water projects. So when we had money left over, the funding committee felt like this was an appropriate project to give funds to, being matched with an SRF loan that also has principal forgiveness included. So we feel like with this plus their SRF loan, they should get a good part of their project completed.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. Are there any questions for the staff? Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
I guess, and this may be for the staff or for representatives, but I see the mayor's on. Is partial funding useful to this project, I guess, is the easiest way to ask my question. I'm assuming it can be phased in some way, but are we sure of that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, per their application, they stated that any amount of funds would be useful and helpful in this situation, and they didn't indicate a minimum dollar amount that would be beneficial for partial funding. They did indicate that they could further scale this project back since this is phase 2 of a big project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for the staff? Ben, I see Mayor Byers is on. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, thank you very much. Your board has been extremely generous to the town of Star Valley Ranch over several years, since about 2007, when we started to completely repair the water system that we took over. And I just want to thank you. We can definitely use those funds, and we'll do our similar match that we've done in the past. We've consistently raised our rates and tried to make sure that all of our projects come in under budget. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there any questions for the mayor? Any questions? Mayor, I have one. If I'm remembering in my mind, which is getting addled in older age, the plans of your town, we've taken care of many of the firefighting capacities and other things. Is this going to bring you pretty close to completion of that whole system?
Very, very close. We still have a few areas where we have some cul-de-sacs that freeze, but as far as fire hydrants, I think there's a couple of mains in this project, and that will help us complete the number of fire hydrants. We now, and I don't have the total number in front of me, but we started with 0 and we have now over 200. So with 33 miles of road, it's definitely what we can use those. Our population is growing. So with everything that's going on, we have building going on all over the town again. So it'll be interesting when we get the census numbers to see how our population has changed since 2010. But yes, we're in good shape.
Anecdotally, Mayor, I'm understanding that real estate on your side of the state and elsewhere in the state is really coming at a premium at this point. Are you noticing an uptick in property buying?
Yes, absolutely. I know last summer we had some bidding wars on some homes, which we never thought we would see, 10 years ago. So yes, and like I said, it hasn't really slowed down, which is pretty amazing to me with everything else that's going on. So, yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Any questions? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Treasurer.
I would move the director's recommendations to approve, I guess it's $723,147 to the town of Star Valley Ranch for water improvement projects.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by the secretary, just a little bit quicker than you, Madam Auditor. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by a thumbs up or an aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you, and congratulations to the town of Star Valley.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to H1C1. Consider one application recommended for no funding, and that is to the town of Moorcroft for the Powder River Water Main Phase 2. The amount requested was $393,776. And with that, we recommended 0 funding for that. I will yield to Beth Blackwell again to provide some detail on that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Blackwell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the town of Moorcroft has received more MRG funding than any other applicant in the pool this time around. Furthermore, their match funding for this grant was presented to the board in April in the form of a drinking water state revolving fund loan. Staff had recommended denial of this loan based on a review of prior financials. And so we felt, based on their prior funding levels and their lack of a match for this grant, it was appropriate for this loan or this grant to be a no funding recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? What's the pleasure? Is anyone from the town of Moorcroft? Seeing none. What's the pleasure of the board? Oh, we have one. Okay, thank you. Ms. Schneider. I think you're muted according to my screen. Oh, there you are.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We can. You don't sound like Cheryl.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mayor Dick Clare. We would first like to thank you, the chairman, and the board for considering this application, and we would like to thank Beth and the staff for the work they put in on it. We understand the situation, and we are disappointed, but we know where we're at, so we'll accept the recommendation and not miss a beat. We'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions of the mayor? Any comments to the mayor? Well, Mr. Mayor, I have to say your town was hopping on the weekend, so it looked like good things were hopefully coming your direction.
We hope so.
All right. Well, thank you. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether we need any action on this. It's not recommended, or do we need an affirmative action?
We need an affirmative action.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move the director's recommendations to not recommend funding at this time for the kind of more crop for their Powder River water main.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. It's been moved by the treasurer. Is there a second? Is there a second? It's been seconded by the secretary. This time I'm going to recognize the auditor, though. Valiant attempt. So the auditor does the second. Is there any discussion?
We just talked.
Any discussion?
We're just about ready to leave. We're voting on.
Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye or thumbs up. That motion carries. Thank you. Madam Director.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the MRG portion of the meeting today. And with your indulgence, we are always looking for, the staff, we're always looking for ways to improve interest in the programs and making the funding more palatable, and looking for ways to just increase applications and support. So I asked the staff to come up with sort of their top 3 rules, if they could see changes in what they would like to see to help facilitate, whether it's process, whether it's making things more palatable for applicants. And so we came up with proposed changes to Chapter 3 of the MRG rules, and chapters, the Clean Water State Revolving Funds and the Drinking Water State Revolving Funds and the Farm Loan Program. And so with your indulgence, we'd just like to, at a high level, take the board through some of the ideas we had. We've got a short PowerPoint presentation that Ben will run for us here in a minute, to just kind of high level, let the board know some of the things that we would like to see. We're not looking for any board action per se at this point. We'd like to come back to the board in August with a more formalized rule changes that you can see with the strike ad and that sort of thing. What we're looking for is just some thoughts from the board and either agreement or no, that's not a good idea. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we can begin the short PowerPoint.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ben. Okay, the first slide, Ben. Okay, as I mentioned, we're looking at Chapter 3, which is the MRG, Chapter 11, Clean Water SRF, Drinking Water SRF, and Chapter 16 and Chapter 7, the Farm Loan. Next slide. Okay, so with respect to Chapter 3, Ms. Blackwell and I will kind of go back and forth here and give you some of our thoughts. One of the things we thought might be helpful in light of the decreased funding for the next biennium is to provide some flexibility in the rules for setting the schedule for MRG funding, depending upon the funds that are actually available. As I mentioned, the funding is going to be decreased to approximately $13 million. Right now, the rules require that we hold two meetings per year in the biennium, so one in January and one in June. Depending upon how things go, we thought, well, maybe it makes sense to hold a meeting in January or February of 2021, and then maybe in June of 2022 to get as much funding out as we can, and then sort of have a cleanup meeting toward the end of the biennium. Or some other decision could be made on that, but just sort of broadening the rules to allow us and the board to determine what's the best way to distribute funds in light of the reduced amount available. So with that, Beth, anything to add on that?
I think you hit it all.
Okay. Next slide. So one of the things that is become apparent to us is that Wyoming Statute 94604 provides for both grants and loans in the MRG program. We have obviously the grant provisions, but we've never promulgated any loan provisions. And so we always get questions about that from applicants as well as from legislators about our ability to make loans out of the fund. As I mentioned, we've never done that before. We're not sure if the board would like that flexibility. Beth, I'll yield to you to kind of let the board know sort of just a loose framework that we were talking about.
Absolutely. A lot of times this has come up during our discussions when we are contemplating an emergency application that staff has determined doesn't meet the definition of an emergency, so we're not recommending approval. That doesn't mean the project's not a good project, it just means it doesn't meet that threshold. So at those times, board members have inquired about the ability to give a loan. So what we did is we based this on our JPA loan program, specifically the interest rate. We give the board the ability to set an interest rate between 0 or the average rate of return realized on all permanent mineral trust fund investments as determined by the state treasurer for the 5 calendar years immediately preceding the year in which the loan was made. Currently, that's 5.1%. We just thought it made sense to present this to you all. If this is something you do want us to pursue and include in our rules, we thought that was a reasonable interest rate, give the board the option of setting it. We've also limited the term to 10 years. I don't know if that's too long, if the board would like it to be a shorter term, and then repayment of it would be required in annual installments, just like all of our other loans. One of the things that would be different with this is if the board chose to award a loan, we would have to go back and do the analysis in the office to determine their ability to repay that loan. Generally, that information or that analysis is done prior to like our loan award. So it could be something that we just change our process and we do that analysis while we're reviewing the grant, if loans is something that the board would like us to include in the rules.
Ben, next slide, please. And you'll see this is just sort of a proposed section whatever, which would deal with loans that would be added to Chapter 3 or some semblance of that. This is just an example. And as Beth mentioned, it would be based on the JPA loan that we have. So with that, is really, we have some other cleanup things to do in Chapter 3, but those are sort of the main sort of large issues, if you will, that we would like to address. So why don't we stop right there before we go into the SRF and see if the board has any comments or suggestions or yes to loans, no to loans. Any direction would be appreciated.
Thanks, Director. Thanks, Ms. Blackwell. Are there any comments on this? Ben, did we still have? Yeah, we do. We do have the auditor and superintendent. Any notions on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
I feel like pursuing the option of loans sounds very attractive on the face, but I guess still being new to this position, I guess I would ask staff if over the years they see gaps that a loan could fill. I just know some of these, I see this being useful, but I know some of these municipalities and projects just can't take on more debt, no matter how attractive, no matter how low the interest rate is. So I guess that would be my question is, it seems like a great idea to me, but is there actually a gap this would fill?
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Is there a response or?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, I would say, as I always say in our office, loan is a four-letter bad word. No one wants one because they don't want to pay the money back. But I think if we, as we generally do, analyze an entity's financial ability to take a loan, I would say 25% of the time, maybe, the people who are applying for an emergency grant could probably take a loan. There are those instances, the town of Bags, when their wastewater treatment plant had some issues, they were one that couldn't take a loan. There are certain entities that we know for sure can afford a loan. There's other entities that choose not to afford a loan because they haven't raised their rates in 20 years and they're still paying $15 for all the water they want. So there's reasons why entities can afford a loan, which through the SRF process and any of our other loan processes, we would work with those entities to ensure that they adjusted their rates so that they could afford the loan. We wouldn't approve the loan until they had done those things. So generally with our communities, if we've determined they can't afford a loan, we'll work with them, try to come up with ways to help them afford the loan while not putting them in a bad situation that potentially can make it so they couldn't pay our loan or any of their other bills or debt.
Thank you. Madam Auditor, just let me ask if you want to have a follow-up on that.
No, not really. I think I would just comment that I would be supportive of exploring that option.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Treasurer.
And I think in a little later, we're going to see at one of the programs where they have different match rates and different interest rates. And I think there's a possibility of looking at that structure and applying it to actually our mineral royalty grants to be able to spread out our smaller basket of money a lot farther, because some communities are, necessarily the only reason they're coming here is that it's free money, or it's really cheap money, but they could probably write a check. And so we don't really have that structure across the board in a lot of these things. And I think we need to kind of look at that, have that discussion. And then as far as loans right now with the low interest rates, it's almost like getting zero interest rate loans or next to it. You can spread it out depending on the circumstances. If it's revenue, I guess the water or sewer rates that are paying for it, they should be able to handle it. If it's out of their general fund or something that's different, then that might be different, but those can be spread out over quite some time. And then, frankly, as I said before, they need to start implementing their 25 cent sales tax so they can actually do some different things on matches. So at this point in time, for the next few years, it's if they've got big projects, they need to work on them and move forward on them and actually get their bonding capacity. It's going to be really expanded because of the interest rate situation, or maybe really even reissue some of their bonds and call in and reissue them and expand the amount of money they can put out in capital. So there's a lot of things that have opportunities for our small communities or even our large communities at this point in time. But I guess getting to move in that direction is another thing that Business Council and frankly our Slib board could probably help them with.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Any response, Ms. Blackwell?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, within our rules, we do have a section that highlights who is eligible for a 75% grant. Not everybody is eligible. It has to be an entity with a population of less than 1,300 or be located in a county where the 3-year average of the local government share of state sales and use tax per capita is less than 70% of the statewide average. So we do have some thresholds within our rules that say who can get 75, who can't.
So,
Mr. Treasurer.
The other one had unemployment in it too, but we don't use the U6. They use the regular unemployment that doesn't account for the ones that people that aren't really seeking, I guess, employment. But if you don't count those as they do in the U6, then essentially those folks are a bigger drain on local services as anybody else unemployed.
Right.
And so I think there's a potential to maybe tweak that formula just a little bit to actually make it more responsive to the impact of unemployment in the local communities.
Thank you. Good point. Are there other considerations? Anyone else? So, Ms. Blackwell, there are a couple things that come to my mind. I think, yes, obviously, things are going to be a little tighter, and so if we can spread the money a little further, that's great. And it also gives the opportunity for communities to step up for improvements to their local communities. One thing I want to be mindful of is that we don't create rules that encourage poor behaviors. When I came on, people would say, well, what are your reserves? And if you had reserves, we were going to treat you, in the wrong way. And all we did was train people not to have reserves. So if there's a way to think about how we handle those so that a town that's responsible, gets some consideration. The other thing that I think former Auditor Cloud and I talked about was not necessarily a rubric that would eliminate potential loans, but one that would score communities that had capital improvement plans, so that we could have a better sense of what's pending throughout the state. Glen Rock and Thermopolis both come to mind with a lot of sewer challenges. And then lastly, to Treasury reminded me, I think, and I'd have to remember this, and maybe Betsy remembers, it seems to me that the legislature eliminated bonding authority for towns or for municipalities a few years ago and left the bonding authority for schools. But we might want to look at that.
Mr. Chairman, would you, for the entities that have the capital improvement plans, would you like them to move up the list, knowing that they've planned and they're prepared to move on? And then same thing with reserves. If they're being good stewards of their money and saving, those kind of move them up the list, so we're rewarding good behavior. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, Ms. Blackwell, I think that is what I'm thinking about. It's not, so it's an algorithm, but it's really just informative, so that we are encouraging communities to act responsibly. Any further comments? I guess, Mr. Secretary, I see you pondering this.
I was thinking of your question about bonding authority for local governments. I don't know if it's the same, but was it a constitutional amendment or was it a piece of legislation that increased bonding authority for locals, or am I thinking of something else? And we can talk about it later, but I was trying to think of and answer your question, but I can't.
Chairman Burns was the author of this particular piece of legislation. It was maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. It's just vaguely dim. I know we were trying to protect the authority. Betsy, do you remember any of that? Yeah, okay. We'll check that.
It just seems strange because we're paying for all of the schools by the state's coffers, and then we take away bonding authority, but let schools have it and they don't need it because we're paying for their schools. The legislature does strange things sometimes. So who knows?
I'll try to go back and remember what that was. So, thanks. Next
Okay.
matter.
Mr. Chairman, we'll move on then. Ben, please, next slide, which are proposed changes to both clean water SRF in Chapter 11 and drinking water SRF in Chapter 16. We've been meaning to bring this up for some time. We'd like to change from a two-part application to a one-part application. We have entities that apply. The staff gets to work on the applications. They receive conditional approval prior to being ready to proceed with their projects. And then they sort of languish until the rest of the information comes in, and then before final approval. So we're hoping to be a little more efficient with just a one-part application in which the applicant has to be ready to roll when they come to the SLIB for money under these programs. Beth, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think this will also help us very much manage the principal forgiveness. The programs see a huge influx of applications when we have principal forgiveness. And as the director was stating, they come and get the principal forgiveness, but they're not ready to proceed. And then they hold on to it for 5 years, 6 years down the road, and they still haven't started their project. While there's entities that qualified for principal forgiveness, however, we didn't have any left and they finished their project. So it's really about making sure the money is flowing out quickly and that those that are getting their projects done quickly are using our additional subsidies, because we have certain thresholds we have to meet with the EPA, and if we're not meeting those, we get nasty phone calls and emails, and so I prefer not to get those.
Thank you.
And then the next piece of that would be to extend the application due date from 80 days to 120 days prior to any regularly scheduled SLIB meeting. And Beth, if you'd like to provide a little color on why we feel we need that additional time.
Absolutely. Currently with the two-part application, the first part is due 80 days prior to the board meeting. That's simply who they are, what they're going to do. Are you on the IUP? Have you met the minimum standards to be eligible? Then after the board conditionally approves that loan, they have 60 days to submit their Part 2 application. That includes all the meat of the application, the financials, the environmental review, the design, the bid information, all of that. Generally, it takes much longer than 60 days to go through that process. Most entities take all 60 days of that, and then we have to review. So really, when you look at us adding 40 days to our current time frame, we're actually taking 20 days off, because right now you have 80 days prior to the board meeting, then you have 60 days after that to get your Part 2 in, so that's 140 days. Now we're going to do 120, and when we come to the board, we'll ask for final approval, not conditional approval. We will have done the financial analysis. We will have, the technical guys will have vetted the application, worked through the environmental, worked through the design. And some of that stuff takes a while because people aren't ready to go. So this is going to be kind of like with the MRG when we changed the mindset of, if you've created your emergency, we're not going to reward you for that. We're now going to, when you have your ducks in a row, you're going to get rewarded for that because you're going to be first in line. You're going to get the principal forgiveness. Those kind of things. It's just going to make it, I believe, easier on staff, much easier on staff, because we're not going to be tracking Part 2 applications for years and years and years. I mean, if you get an application and they're not ready to go at this new process, we would essentially say, you've got some more work to do. Please do these things and come back when you're ready to proceed. It's really a matter of utilizing my staff's time the most efficient way we can and making sure that the program works efficiently and we're getting money out expeditiously.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer.
This might not be in this area, but I'm just, something's kind of bugged me the last year or two here is that when we have emergency grants that aren't really emergency grants, but they come in because the interest rate is cheaper or they can get away from something else. And can we have some authority in the rules that where you can just tell these people, don't bother us, you're wasting our, or just say, no, it's not an emergency grant, have the staff make that decision? Because it is kind of frustrating because it wastes our time here because we just have to hear the same stuff twice.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer. The process set out within the rules and within the Office for Emergency Grants is there's a attachment with the MRG that lays it out pretty directly, but also within the statute, we're required to consult with other state agencies in reviewing these applications. So not only does my office and my staff review these applications, we also are required to get the opinion of partnering agencies. So if it's a road project, it's Department of Transportation. If it's water and sewer, it's usually DEQ and or water development. So it's hard for us to say, no, you can't apply, that's not an emergency. Our thought process is everyone's eligible to apply if you meet the eligibility requirements. At that time, we will review your application, and that's when we give our recommendation of, yes, it does meet the threshold of an emergency, or no, it doesn't meet a threshold of an emergency. One thing that often happens is I think it's very hard to sell a project and give all the detail in an application regardless of how many questions you ask or how many open-ended questions you ask. So I think a lot of information comes out at board meetings that we're not privy to when we're vetting these projects. Even if we're reaching out and asking the entities, if you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get the information, and sometimes you just don't know what that right question is. And so sometimes one of the board members has the right question and it opens the floodgates, and we're like, well, that would have been great to know. Every situation is different, and we try really hard, since I've been in this position, to look at what the entity has done to help themselves. Have you just let this problem fester? Have you known about this issue for 10 years and done nothing to save for the project to replace this infrastructure? I think it's really a change in mindset that I've had to really work with our communities to think about, yeah, you have always had this pot of money to go to and it's always been very large. That's not the case anymore, so you have to learn to help yourselves. And we're here to help you figure that out, but sometimes that is raising your rates, the things that people don't want to do, the things that are unpopular and get you not reelected.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, if I could just add on to what Ms. Blackwell was saying. Mr. Treasurer, sometimes what happens to us is we give our initial recommendation after consulting our sister agencies of no, this is not an emergency. And then between the time that we provide that to them and we actually come to the Slib on the application, they've gone out and done all this background work. So now to try to convince you that it is an emergency. So we get stuck with some of this stuff too, even if we raise the right issues and we say, well, what about this or this? We can't help that sometimes they work around us in an attempt to let the board know that, yes, they think this truly is an emergency. So there is some of that too.
I think one thing that we have recommended through this process is with the MRG emergency applications, we've asked to extend that due date. It currently is 10 days prior to any board meeting. We're asking to extend it to 15 days because really at 10 days, we're only getting 2 to 3, maybe 4 days at the very most to vet that application. So giving us just a few more days may give us the ability to dig a little deeper and get to the root of these things prior to them coming out at a meeting or after our recommendation being posted.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, continuing with the Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF, one of the things that we hear from EPA all the time is you're not getting the money out the door. You have these big pots of money. You need to generate more interest in these funds. And so Beth and I and others have sort of gone to work and looked at this, trying to figure out what are other things we can do to make Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF more palatable. And Beth and her staff came up with an idea related to interest rate structures. So Beth, I'll defer to you to present that to the board.
Absolutely. So what we're proposing is in those situations where principal forgiveness is not available, we would give entities a break on the interest rate rather than giving them principal forgiveness. So while we may not be able to forgive part of their loan, we can make the project more affordable by lowering their interest rate. So what we're proposing is for entities that are eligible for 75% principal forgiveness, we're recommending an interest rate of 75 basis points for that loan. So rather than a 2.5 interest rate, they would have a 0.75% interest rate. For entities that are eligible for 50% principal forgiveness, they get a 1% interest rate. For entities eligible for 25% principal forgiveness, they get a 1.25%. And for entities or larger communities such as Cheyenne, Gillette, Green River, Casper, who are not eligible for principal forgiveness, and that's sometimes why they don't come use our program, we would like to offer them an interest rate of 1.75%. So it would be 75 basis points off of the 2.5 that we offer. We believe that this will hopefully help people afford these projects that are expensive regardless. It just, with our small population, there's only so much we can do to get the money out. And, you know, I think I figured out that at the rate we're getting CAP grants, if we're going to spend every dollar of that, it's about $30,000 to $40,000 to each citizen of the state every year if we're going to spend every penny of that. So that's, not everyone can afford that. So we've got to figure out ways to be creative to make these things affordable, especially with less principal forgiveness available.
Right, right.
And then we had one other interest rate scenario that we thought of is to encourage those communities who have large projects to come and use the program, offering interest rate cut for large projects. So we've set some thresholds. They are different amongst the two programs because interest or loans within the clean water program have historically been larger than loans within the drinking water program. We currently have a pending loan of $27.5 million, and it's at 2.5% interest rate. So under this scenario, it would have saved them 2% interest, which would be a big deal on that large amount of money.
Very, very good. Are there any comments? I don't see either the auditor or the superintendent. So please just speak up if you. Oh, there you are. I see you now. Any questions? Any questions? No questions, and I think the treasurer is taking a little bit of a break. Ms. Blackwell, just a quick question. You know, we've been trying to figure out how to get more of these loans pushed out the door. So I think these are really exceptional ideas, and I very much support them. Are we seeing towns come to the engineer now that we have on board, and to try to sort of figure out ways to get these plans in progress faster?
Mr. Chairman, our engineer's been on board since October.
Right.
And when he first started, he was working on the Cheyenne project.
Right.
And then he helped with the January MRG meeting. He did a lot of work with Aetna on that, and then COVID hit. So he really hasn't been out to the communities. We did send an email out to our mailing list to let everyone know he was on board and that he's available to help. Just contact him. Here's his contact information. But we do plan on him hopefully going out and start doing some visits going forward. He currently, while he's been working at home, he's been creating the database of infrastructure that you had requested in January. So while he may not be out and about in those communities, he has done quite a bit of work since he's been with us. And I think with the database that he's developing, he's working with water development, and he's hoping to get GIS involved so that we have it mapped. And so we have a pretty robust database. So I think while he's going through those reports, he's also making notes of entities he needs to go visit.
Great, great. Well, thanks.
Okay, Ben, next slide, please. And Beth, I'll turn this one over to you again. These would be proposed changes to Clean Water SRF related to refinancing of eligible debt.
Absolutely. Currently, the federal regulation as well as the state statute allows us to refinance eligible debt with clean water funds. We allow this in our drinking water program. We just haven't allowed it in our clean water program. I believe this is a good opportunity once again for us to help our communities if they have outstanding debt with or with USDA or somewhere else that meets the eligibility requirements, they could come and refinance with us. When we added this option to drinking water, I believe we've had 6 or 7 loans that refinance. And it's kind of nice because it's one big disbursement and all the funds are gone. You don't have little disbursements. You disperse the funds, throw it in repayment, and you're good to go. But it helps our communities lower their interest rate, helps them budget, especially when revenues are decreasing. This is just another tool to help our communities try to make it through these difficult times.
Very good.
Okay, next slide, please. And actually, I think the heading on this is incorrect. It should be Drinking Water SRF Proposed Statute Change. One of the things we noticed with the GID situation last summer, we were trying to find access to money quickly. Unfortunately, the Drinking Water SRF program requires that the annual intended use plan be presented to the Select Water Committee prior to being presented to Slib before approval. If entities are going to be eligible for that money, they have to have their project on that list. So that list needs to be amended. So it has to go back to Select Water and then come to Slib for approval. We found that that was a little difficult given we were trying to move and get things going quickly. So we wondered, is there a workaround that perhaps we could suggest to the legislature that would help, at least in times of emergency? We presented this in your briefings, and unfortunately, the treasurer's not here right now, but he had suggested that perhaps a workaround might be that the chairman of Slib and the chairman of Select Water agree that they both think that this should be on the IUP, and until we can get that in place, everybody decides to proceed forward until they can convene the Select Water Committee and then the Slib afterwards to ratify. There may be some other process, there may be some other suggestions, but certainly we'd like to kind of dig into this just to, again, make money a little easier to come by and not get bogged down with procedural requirements when it's an emergency. Okay, next slide, Ben. And Beth, did you want to take this one, please?
Sure. In 2018, the America Water Infrastructure Act was passed by Congress, and this did quite an overhaul of the drinking water state revolving loan program. One of the main things it did was extend the term of these loans from 20 years to 30 years, or the useful life of the project, whichever is less. Currently, our statute only allows us to amortize the loans for 20 years for a regular borrower. It does allow 30 years for our disadvantaged borrowers, but we feel, once again, to make these projects affordable and to help our communities, it's appropriate to request that our statute be changed to allow for a 30-year term.
Okay.
Okay, so that kind of concludes our overview on some of the changes we'd like to see to clean water and drinking water SRF rules. Are there any questions, any other thoughts? Would you like us to proceed and bring those back to you for the August meeting?
Any questions or other thoughts? Madam Superintendent, Madam Auditor, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank the staff for the work that they've done on this. When I first started as a member 6 years ago, or almost 6 years ago, it was a much different story with these funds. And I just appreciate it was not one thing that made the use of these funds more accessible or made these funds more accessible to communities. It was a multitude, or excuse me, it was multiple actions and changes in process and policy. So thanks to the staff for just sticking with this and making this as accessible and successful as possible for cities, towns, and counties.
Terrific. Thank you. Madam Auditor, any comments? None? Mr. Treasurer, while you were out, we discussed the interest rate changes. I think you've been briefed, and also your suggestion on some of the changes for the IUP. I think those were very good suggestions. Is there anything else you want to bring to the attention of the board? Okay, thank you. Mr. Secretary.
No.
So I'm going to take it, and I'll look at head nods on the screen, but I'm going to take it that we approve of all of the recommendations and proceeding. And so I'm going to recommend you continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
So this brings us to the last chapter that we've looked at in our wish list of programs. Chapter 7, the Farm Loan Program. And actually, these changes sort of came about during our discussions with Representative Greer during the legislative session. He had a constituent that would have been great for the Farm Loan Program, but he could not meet the definition of beginning agricultural producer. So Beth and her staff, and in consultation with Representative Greer and myself, we are recommending some tweaks because we're thinking that maybe this operated piece of it may not be helping when it comes to attracting the right types of persons to participate in this program. I'll defer to you, Beth, at this point to give a little more detail.
Absolutely. One of the things that we regularly have to deny a farm loan or beginning agricultural producer application on is the fact that they've operated land in excess of the thresholds that are identified in our definition. So what we have recommended, and after our discussions with Representative Greer, we recommend taking out the and or operated. You want an ag producer to have operated something prior to coming and borrowing from us. You don't want someone like me who has raised dogs and children to go into the cattle world. You just don't. I wouldn't be a good rancher. I don't think I would do well at it. So really, we are denying the individuals that you want to have, those individuals that have, you know, they have their primary job and then they're running cattle and leasing land and, you know, they're balancing 5 different things. Those are the people you want to come and borrow from these programs because they're the ones who are going to be successful. You know, we don't want an individual who's never, like I said, ran an operation, but we also don't want someone coming and taking advantage of the program that, say, they're doing real or estate planning and they're trying to transfer property within a family. We have that happen as well. So I think the owning part is important because, you know, if a child was part of their family operation, they've been making income, they probably are not going to qualify for this program because they will be in excess of these limits. One of the other things that we did in reviewing the definition is we doubled the threshold of all the different types of land that we identify in there, working with individuals within the Office of State Lands and Investments who do have agricultural backgrounds. This was their recommendation that the thresholds that we had were so narrow that we probably were never going to really find someone who meets all of those. So
then next slide, please.
Thanks.
And so the next slide kind of gives you the new definition as Beth described it with the increased acreages and removing that and or operated piece of it. Okay, Ben, next slide, please. Another change to the rule is the statute clearly details all those costs that a borrower under the program is responsible to cover when they obtain a loan through the program. However, these costs are not specifically enumerated in the rule, and a lot of times people don't go and look at the statute, and so they're very surprised to see that, you know, they need to pay for the title insurance and the recording fees and all of that. So this would just, in the interest of transparency, add that language from the statute into the rule, so it's more clear that when folks are reviewing the rule, they understand everything that they're getting into. Okay, Ben, next slide, please. Okay. Beth, I'll let you take this one, when the farm loans are in default.
Absolutely. Currently, Chapter 7 rules allows for a farm loan borrower who is in default to submit a repayment plan that it's a 5-year plan to repay that one payment. During that time period, they're also required to make all their annual payments. So what we have found is in instances where farm operations are struggling for more than 1 year, which generally it's not just one bad year, you have several in a row before you get back up. What an entity has to do if they can't make their next year's payment is they have to pay off their current repayment plan and then request another repayment plan. So it's a lot of paperwork, and it's a lot of work for the office as well as the borrower. So statute allows us to re-amortize a loan for 30 years if a borrower's in default. So what we're recommending is including that option within our rules so that we have more ability to work with our borrowers that are having a hard time. One of the main reasons for this is I can think of 2 specific borrowers where we would initiate foreclosure, incur these costs, and then at the last hour, they would make their payment. This last one we had was we were getting ready to leave to drive to Cody to go to the sheriff's sale, and we received a phone call that the borrower had filed bankruptcy. And so 18 months later, we finally came to a resolution, which was re-amortize the loan for 30 years. So we feel like in the best interest of our borrowers, as well as the state, to not incur the costs related to foreclosing and dealing with bankruptcies, it would be prudent for us to have 2 options to work with our borrowers when they are having problems making their loan payments.
Okay. And Ms. Blackwell, I'm reminded of at least one incident where this was a pattern of behavior that clearly was. Are there ways that we can work to discourage that?
I can work with our AG representatives to put, we will only approve X amount of repayment plans. I think you and I are thinking of the same borrower.
Right.
And so I would very much support something like that in the rules because,
okay.
Every year we spent days and days working through this process to, at the last hour, have him make his payment.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can work on that, absolutely.
Great.
And then next slide, please, Ben. With respect to statutory changes, there is an inconsistency in one of the statutes where in the 2017 legislative session, the maximum amount of a loan was increased to $1 million. The statute, I think, still says $800,000. So we would propose working on that just to make the statute consistent with, in fact, the amount of the loan increase as provided by the legislative session.
Very good.
And then finally, one last thing. Ms. Blackwell spoke about this with Representative Greer about are there ways that we can partner with community banks to get a better idea about the nature of our borrowers? And Beth, Ms. Blackwell, I will yield to you to explain this idea that you batted around with Representative Greer.
Okay, and I see Superintendent Balo as.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry for interjecting, but I do have a question or at least a thought posed as a question regarding the farm loan program. And, I'm not sure what the legislative intent was there. Whether it was land-based or a business incentive or what have you, but without taking too much of a bird walk, if it's to incentivize the agricultural sector, I wonder if we're limiting ourselves by just looking at sort of a traditional farmer agriculture loan and not incorporating some of the newer aspects of the agricultural industry or sector into our rules, or even if we have the room to do that. So, so for example, you know, students who are involved in an FFA program now, who are very much on a track to be contributors to the FFA sector, may be thinking about other areas of agriculture to be successful in Wyoming, whether that's technology or ag business. And is there any room in the statute or in the rules to contemplate something other than sort of this traditional concept of agriculture?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Superintendent, I can tell you what I was told when I started the job. As far as the intent was to be a safety net for our ranchers and our farmers in times of high interest rates. And primarily the thing that was repeated to me was the intent of the program is not to compete with commercial banks. And so we don't want to be in the business of, I don't think, doing operating lines and that kind of lending, because we just don't have the staff, nor do we have the expertise to do that. But I'm sure we can look at the statute and see what options we have. I think the one thing that prevents people from using this program would be the interest rate, as we discussed yesterday. With a regular farm loan, the interest rate is 8%. So it's not a great interest rate. With these beginning ag loans, they have a 10-year where the first 10 years is the average of the treasury, which I think the last one we closed was at like 1.2 or 1.3. So they get a huge cut of their interest rate that first 10 years. And generally our borrowers either pay off in those 10 years or at the end of the 10 years, they refinance with a commercial bank.
Thanks. Please go ahead, Madam Superintendent.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Beth, for framing that, because framing it less as an incentive for new farmers and ranchers and more of a safety net in tough times is a perfect explanation. And I completely agree. We do not want to compete in any way. So I really appreciate sort of laying out that legislative intent, and that helps me frame it, I guess, less enthusiastic and more in our lane of making sure that we provide that safety net for farmers and ranchers. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Treasurer.
And the young farmers one was made primarily for people who don't get a discount at your senior discount at your local restaurant.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Mr. Chairman, which brings us to our final piece on the farm loan is this notion of partnering with state chartered commercial banks to discuss and figure out more about those folks who are borrowing from us. Ms. Blackwell had a discussion with Representative Greer and her staff, and they thought this might be something of interest, something that definitely might require some work and looking at to see how it would work. But with that, I will yield the floor to Ms. Blackwell.
This idea has been in my head since I started my job 7.5 years ago. Prior to this, I was a bank examiner, and prior to that, I thought a cow was a cow was a cow. And I learned quickly that is not the case, that all cows are different, and depending if they've got a little buddy with them, whether they're pairs, whether they're whatever. So really the staff within my office don't have your traditional lending backgrounds, but especially in the ag arena. And what I remember most from being a bank examiner is loan officers telling me, well, I know my borrower. And I don't doubt that they did know their borrower, because they probably knew their borrower's dad, their borrower's great-grandfather, or maybe great-great-grandfather. I mean, there was no doubt that they knew their borrower and that they knew their business and they knew their industry in their area. But when you're an examiner, you're like, well, you got to take it from here and put it on paper so I know what you know. And so when we're looking at these, really every area within the state is different. It depends on what you're running, on what kind of land. That makes a difference whether the business plan that you've submitted to us is acceptable, appropriate, reasonable. So what my thoughts are is figuring out some way that we can use the money we have available for these loans and partnering with our state institutions, kind of like, you know, the first-time home buyer, something similar to that, whether it's we guarantee a loan and that allows the commercial banks to provide a lower interest rate for a longer term rather than just a 10-year term at a lower interest rate. Maybe they get a 30-year term with a set rate that is for the term. There's a lot of thoughts here in the sense of how we can leverage this, because truly I think our commercial banks, from the few bankers I've talked to, they don't want to lose these borrowers. These are the borrowers they want. They've been working, they've established relationships with their families. And how do we take the money that we have, the resource that we have, and leverage it with the resource of knowledge and expertise that those community banks have? Because we do the best we can, and we look at everything we can related to these applications. But when it comes to projecting and reviewing those business plans, we don't have the expertise. We're doing the best we can, and so far we've done a really good job, I think. I think my staff, we've been very conservative. But I just think somehow we can make this program work better for our office as well as the state. And, you know, whether it's we partner with these community banks and they do the underwriting, and we, you know, right now we have a $100 application fee. Maybe if we increase that $100 application fee to $200 and we work with the banks and have them underwrite, or like I said, somehow we guarantee, like with the Farm Credit Services, they make the loan, they are incurring the risk, but we've done a 75% guarantee on it. So if something goes wrong, we're going to go in, pay that off, we'll assume it, and then it'll be on our books and they'll ultimately pay us off. I mean, there's a lot of thought processes here, but it's a matter of, is this something the board is interested in? And then how we go about approaching it, because my thought is we'd have to approach the banking board to figure out, you know, is this something they're interested in? Because truly, I think they would be. Any way that they can generate any more non-interest income, anything they can do, I think they would be happy to work with us. But how that relationship works, I have lots of thoughts, but it's just something that I think we can do better here.
So, Beth, from my part, I think that is a good idea. It's a little bit like what we tried to do with the large project loan program, where we didn't want the state trying to underwrite all these things and understand every aspect of it, and we really wanted our banks to really help them get more business. So I think it's worth pursuing and looking at. And I would, you know, taking a note from what the superintendent was suggesting, you know, one of the things that we're noting right now, and I don't know if this is going to be a long-term problem or not, but you can't get kill dates for custom livestock slaughter at this point till June in some cases, and certainly March in many others, 2021. And, you know, there may be some people that want to try to set up some of these processes, and if we could expand, those would be directly related to agriculture, and there might be ways that we could, you know, be able to leverage that a little bit. So I like it. Any other comments? Auditor? Mr. Treasurer.
And there are some federal programs where you have some guarantees for different classes of farmers. I know there's minority guarantees for different folks, different programs that are out there through the FSA. So, you know, we might just look at all the different types of programs that are available and see where we can integrate and lock in and you know, if we need to change our lock or our key or whatever to fit in there. Same way that you do with the drinking water things, you know, those type of things. Kind of get a better idea of what's out there. Work with our lending institutions. I think it's a good road to travel.
Good job. Any other comments? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda for today, and we thank you all very much for listening to our proposed changes, and we'll bring back something to you in August showing progress on all of these, and may need to go through the regular rulemaking process and perhaps could kick it off at that point.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any concluding comments from anyone? Superintendent, auditor, treasurer, secretary? Hearing none, I think we are adjourned. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sure, I'm going to